Story 1. My mother passed away yesterday, and I am struggling to cope. I can't stop crying as I write this. Tomorrow is the funeral, and today they are bringing her body back from the hospital. The operation did not go as planned, and she died after 4 days in a coma. My brother's wife is pregnant and will give birth in a month. It feels unbearable that my mother didn't live to see her other grandchild. Story 2. Chadwick Boseman was battling cancer without anyone knowing, yet he delivered legendary performances while fighting for his life. Story 3. Anton Yelchin was incredibly young and had so much potential. It is heartbreaking that he lost his life in such a senseless way. I still find myself thinking about it. Story 4. My husband died at 29, and it was unexpected. However, the most shocking event was that 6 months later, my cousin, who was like a brother to me, also died unexpectedly. Story 5. My soon-to-be wife was taken from me by a drunk driver almost 30 years ago, and it still affects me to this day. I have not had another relationship since then. Story 6. One person I wasn't expecting was Bob Saget. He just randomly appeared one day while I was scrolling, and I exclaimed, "What?" out loud. Story 7. My sister took her own life over this new year, allegedly because her dog was very sick and she wanted to go when he did. She was in her early 50s. Story 8. Steve Irwin is, to this day, the only celebrity death that truly shocked me. I was only 11 at the time, and I still remember exactly where I was, who told me, and how I felt. That man, alongside David Attenborough, shaped so much of who I am today. My love of nature, animals, conservation, and my curiosity about the earth and everything living on it can all be traced back to watching them on television. When Steve died, a piece of my childhood died too. Story 9. Kobe. I'm not even a huge basketball or Kobe fan, but the way he and his daughter died was so sad and shocking. Story 10. Norm Macdonald was truly one of a kind. He appeared unexpectedly with a unique style of comedy. Story 11. Imagine being trapped, faced with an impossible choice: burning in the fire, suffocating in the smoke, or jumping from 100 floors to certain death. Though many endured this horror, the thought remains just as haunting. Story 12. My grandfather passed away suddenly at the age of 26 in 1973, with no explanation. He collapsed while going up a flight of stairs during a visit to his father in the hospital and died instantly. My dad was around 6 years old at the time. The autopsy was inconclusive. I recently revisited the case in 2023 and had someone examine it, but there were no new findings. Story 13. My sister passed away 6 years ago today. She was hit by a car in a parking lot and died on the 11th day of life support. Her husband struggled to let her go and died a year and a half later. He shattered our family. She was the matriarch. Story 14. My son was born 20 days before his 3rd birthday. My firstborn and only son. I lost 7 angels before they were more than a brief presence in my belly. My grandmother passed away from cancer. My grandfather suffered a stroke and heart attack a week after my son's birth. My grandmother faced unchecked diabetes and complications from COVID-19. Losing grandparents is incredibly painful. My dad's and brother's boss was ill for a long time, but his death shook me to the core. I cried harder than I ever thought I would. He was a great man. Story 15. John Lennon, Payne Stewart, and a 39-year-old coworker. But, we are all just a heartbeat away. Story 16. Anthony Bourdain. The loss I felt and the impact it had on me were significant. It took a long time to be able to watch something of his again. Story 17. Farrah Fawcett had the unfortunate timing to die on the same day as Michael Jackson. She was even overlooked during the In Memoriam segment at the Oscars. Story 18. John Ashton Taggart from Beverly Hills Cop. The shocking part was they announced he died while I was watching the movie. Story 19. My dad had heart issues that run in our family. He had just been given a clean bill of health from a doctor 2 weeks prior when he suffered a heart attack while camping and died before hitting the floor. I wasn't with him, but some strangers performed CPR while they waited for an ambulance. I wish I could know who they are so I could thank them for trying to save him. This happened 3 months before my wedding day. I had sent him a picture of me in my dress, and our last conversation was him on the phone in tears, expressing how he couldn't wait to celebrate with me. Story 20, my mom's. My dad called in sick on her behalf. I went to school as normal. Friends who lived around the corner were asking why there was an ambulance at our house that morning. I was oblivious. My dad arrived at school at lunchtime and took us home. I don't remember much of the next few days. I remember my head hitting the headrest in the car as we were told what was going on. I remember going to the hospital, but not what I saw. I remember breaking away from my dad's grip as I stood in the room and running home, which was only a few hundred feet away. I remember crashing into my bed and sobbing. I remember my maternal grandfather's consoling hand on my back. I remember seeing my dad's maroon sweater a few days later and just running to him. I remember talking with my paternal grandmother about how excited I was to be turning 10 a couple of weeks prior. I don't remember anything else. Not the moment she died, the funeral, or anything. It's gone. Utterly gone. And I know it affected me. I'm still angry about it, but there's no resolution. I just have to scream into the void, I guess. I drove past the hospital where she died recently. I can count on one hand how many times I've passed since 1992. I knew it wasn't a good idea, but it was the only way for me to get across town. Still absolutely chills me. Story 21. My sister unexpectedly passed away on January 4th. She was completely fine, went to bed like any other normal day, and just never woke up. Nothing suspicious. It was due to natural causes. My heart goes out to you and your family during this difficult time. Please, feel free to cry and let it all out. It's natural to express your emotions. Yell and scream if you need to. It's all part of the grief process. Sending hugs. Story 22. A friend I met while traveling back in 2017 died completely unexpectedly in late January 2024. He was roughly my age, in his mid to late 30s, probably a little younger, and generally in great shape. He ran marathons and participated in strongman competitions. There was no sickness or any indication of health issues. One day, he was found dead by his family. I am still having trouble grasping that. Story 23. My grandpa passed away a month after I had my baby. He was truly my best friend until the end. I miss him every day. Story 24. One of my coworkers on the graveyard shift turned to me and said, "Hey, I'm not supposed to tell you about this until official news tomorrow, but Lincoln died in a motorcycle accident. He was 28 and had just had a baby the week prior. He got that motorcycle to celebrate and dreamed of working on it with his daughter, teaching her to ride it and passing it down to her." Story 25. I had a friend die from an accidental drug overdose. I found out through a text while out to eat. I barely held it together. We had known each other since we were 14. He went to cosmetology school and had been my hairdresser since he got his license. I still find hair appointments to be a little sad. I love my hairstylist, but honestly, he should be the one doing it. I miss him so much. Story 26. A coworker of mine was one of those super outgoing, life of the party types. He was a really great guy whom everybody loved and enjoyed being around. He was under a lot of pressure at work because our company was being acquired, and the new management was loading him with numerous responsibilities. He had to go into the office on a Saturday for a conference call. After the call, he sat at his desk and took his own life. Story 27. My godfather had a series of strokes followed by a heart attack. Bray Wyatt. Story 28. My father collapsed at the end of his workday. He texted his boss that he was tired and going home. He died in the ambulance. The last time I saw him was a couple of weeks before that. I miss him so much. Story 29. My brother died suddenly from an accident in his 20s, and then I lost a pregnancy at 25 weeks shortly after. It was the worst year of my life. I almost didn't recover from the back-to-back sudden losses. People say all kinds of things trying to be helpful. They call them your guardian angels and say things like, "They're in a better place." None of that helps and sometimes can be rage-inducing. Now that it's been more than a decade since my losses, I can only tell you what my experience has been. The grief never goes away. Rather, It ebbs and flows like the ocean tide. The first, you're on the shore, and it seems like there are waves of grief crashing constantly. With time, you drift further out and you find your new normal. There are still storms when you'll feel a huge wave of grief crash over you, but the time between those feelings will get longer. Right now, you're drowning in your grief. You'll learn to swim. I miss my brother every day, but I don't cry for him every day anymore. I miss him the most when I am doing something he really enjoyed. Watching a television show we used to watch together brings memories. Sometimes one of my children will say or do something that reminds me of him for a brief moment. It's bittersweet. As a chef, everyone gathered at my home during the holidays. I always made sure everyone had a favorite dish. Holidays are still hard. I'm so sorry for your loss. Story 30. My mom died 6 years ago this December. 1 month prior, she had a stroke and brain surgery. She was out of the hospital for a week. She taught her PhD classes at home. Her doctor said she was doing well considering what happened. She died 2 hours shy of Dad's birthday. I am still heartbroken. I only got to spend a few weeks with her since I spent almost a year working overseas. I miss her so much. Story 31. My cousin was found in 2016 when I was 17 and she was 19. She was discovered on the side of Highway 2 near the Kalispell area with a gunshot wound to her stomach. The entire family has speculated about what happened and who was responsible, but no one has been brought to justice. The first week after I heard the news was the most draining week I have ever experienced. I lacked the energy to stand, talk, focus, or do anything other than sit there and stare. I was completely blank. Even after 9 years, it has been incredibly difficult to fully move on. Frankly, I don't think I have completely gotten over it yet. When someone dies so young, it's a life stolen. Story 32. Osama bin Laden was killed 10 years after the attacks on the Twin Towers in May 2011. We had just gotten used to him being at large and sort of assumed the government wouldn't find him, or maybe we thought they would, but we weren't eagerly waiting for it to happen. Then one morning, it was all over the news, and I was reminded that this was still going on. By the time he was killed, Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan was old news. The focus had shifted to the resurgent Taliban, supporting the central Afghan government, and preparing for withdrawal from Iraq, which were the significant issues in American foreign policy. The major events in the broader Muslim world included the Arab Spring. Hosni Mubarak had resigned, and Egypt was transitioning to semi-military control. Libya was descending into civil war, and protests were erupting in several other countries, leading the world to wonder how far it would go. Then the news broke that bin Laden was dead, and it brought back the memory that terrorism used to be the primary concern, not mass protests in countries that were considered relatively safe. Story 33. My friend Chris. I always think of him when I hear Fire and Rain by James Taylor, but I always thought that I'd see you, baby, one more time. Rest in peace, Chris. You're incredibly missed. Story 34. For me, the first was Chris Farley. I grew up watching him on Saturday Night Live. I was young and thought he was the funniest guy ever. As a fellow overweight kid from Wisconsin, I looked up to him. I was up all night feeling terrible when it was announced that he had passed away. I sometimes wonder how well Shrek would have done with him as the lead, as had been planned. The second was Chris Cornell. Many from the grunge era had died, but he had made it through. He was open about his struggles, but it always seemed like he was managing everything. Then, seemingly out of the blue, he took his own life. I still get a lump in my throat when I hear him sing the words, "No one sings like you anymore." Story 35. Olivia Hussey was older, but she was actually the last person I would have expected to hold off for at least another 10 to 15 years. Story 36. Robin Williams. Even thinking about it makes me a bit numb, and I think of him and his daughter every time I play a Zelda game. Sometimes I visit the Robin Williams character in Breath of the Wild just to see him alive again. Story 37. Famously, Kobe. Personally, my mother died instantly in a car accident when I was 13, and I never saw her face again. She had called me just 2 minutes prior. It obviously changed the trajectory of my life dramatically. Even as I approach 40, It shocks me every time I see a high school peer in the obituary section. Story 38. A colleague of mine who was relatively young, in his mid-30s, and came from a privileged background has passed away. I still can't believe it. Story 39. A friend of mine died when we were 14. He stayed home from school because he wasn't feeling well, and a few days later, we found out that he had died when we saw that his sister had put a memorial on his page. He went from fine to heart failure in less than a week. Story 40. During my senior year of high school, my chemistry lab partner and his girlfriend, a junior, were killed in a car accident caused by two drunk drivers 2 months before graduation. 3 weeks later, another senior and junior at our high school were killed in a car accident due to one driver running a red light. It was all senseless and shocking for us. Story 41. In 2015, my oldest sister died. She had just returned to college after Christmas vacation. A week or two later, we received a call that she was on life support after overdosing on heroin. She was only 22. Story 42. Both my maternal grandparents died suddenly, though not at the same time. They both shocked me completely. As for celebrities Bob Saget and Liam Payne. Story 43. My neighbor's death was tragic. I found her inside her home lying on the floor with a slit throat. On the table, there was one plate with 2 spoons, 2 glasses, and wine, even though she never drank alcohol in her life. It was shocking, overwhelming, and heartbreaking. She was full of life. Story 44. Chris Cornell. That was the celebrity death that hit me the hardest. Not that it was completely unexpected, given all of the Soundgarden lyrics about death and suicide, but it still hurt. Story 45. My best friend killed himself, which I thought would be the world's biggest shock. His sister, also my best friend and very close to him, collapsed to the floor in her room less than 2 years later and said, "I can't do this again." A couple of days after Thanksgiving, when their oldest brother died sometime between Thanksgiving Eve and Black Friday. His roommate was out of town for the holiday, and he was discovered that Monday, dead at his desk. That shocked me more than my friend's suicide because I honestly thought it would be their other brother. It's been a long time, and everyone has moved forward, but nothing has shocked me as much as the second death. Story 46. An old school friend of mine, a guy who was only 23, has passed away. The exact cause of his death is still somewhat unknown. He was found dead at home, and there was nothing that pointed to suicide, homicide, or anything like that. He probably just tripped, fell, and hit something badly. Story 47. My grandmother was fine and was supposed to be home from the hospital the next day. Then she was gone. She lived in Maryland and I lived in Florida. To this day, I still do not know how she died. I also want to mention my mother, who had an aneurysm bleed. She is still alive, thank God. But she is not the same. She used to be so precise and organized. Now she is completely different. And both my sister and I realized that we do not know much about her because she spent most of our childhood working and away from us. Now she is trying to make up for all that lost time, and it's really sad. Even though I do not have much to remember her by from before all this, I do have some good memories, and I miss who she was sometimes. Story 48. Keith Flint from The Prodigy came as a bit of a shock to me, to be honest. I see many names here, and I agree with all of them, especially Robin Williams. Also, when my emotionally detached father called to say, "Your mom died today," it was a shock as well. It has been 12 years now, but it still hurts. Story 49. Comic Storian. His videos frequently appeared in my feed, and I considered him a mainstay of YouTube. He seemed like a genuinely nice person who was passionate about storytelling. I don't think he was much older than me. Hearing that he passed away unexpectedly caught me off guard. I'm not sure why. I wasn't a devoted fan, just someone who would occasionally listen to one of his videos while I worked. I was a bit surprised by how hurt I felt upon hearing it. Story 50. My grandfather. One of my uncles passed away 6 weeks prior, and then we received the call that my grandfather also passed. There is an unfortunate history of men in my family passing unexpectedly. I miss him every day. I was 8 when he died. Now I am married with a child of my own, and I wonder if he is proud of me and how far I have come. I can still picture him on his back porch, grilling with a cigar in his mouth and a boat hat on. Anytime I smell cigars, I am reminded of him. Story 51. My good friend walked into a storage unit he had rented and put a gun in his mouth. He was full of life and surrounded by people who loved him. Story 52. When Lance Reddick died, I was shocked. He was only 60 years old. Then Andre Braugher, who was just a month older than Lance, died 6 months later, and I was really surprised. Story 53. My uncle came to visit from Germany with some of my mom's siblings for her concert. He needed to use the bathroom at my mom's place but mistook the door to the basement for the bathroom and fell down the stairs. After 10 days in a coma, he passed away. He was one of my favorite people. It's been almost 6 years, and I still miss him every day. Story 54. Michael Jackson. I was working in the electronics department at Kmart, and I remember receiving numerous calls from people searching for Michael Jackson CDs and other merchandise. After the third or fourth call, I informed the customer that they were not the first to ask and inquired if something had happened to prompt all the calls. Oh, you haven't heard? He passed away. I received many more calls after that, with lots of people looking for Michael Jackson items. We also had a few customers who came in searching for CDs, which we did not carry. It was strange to witness people's reactions as they rushed to buy items after someone had died. Story 55. Michael Jackson. That was my first time hearing about someone famous who had a significant impact on my life passing away. It was the first time I realized that famous people are not permanent fixtures in society. They are, in fact, humans who eat, excrete, and bleed just like everyone else. Story 56. The death of Chris Cornell was the saddest for me and came out of nowhere. I was a huge fan, and to me, he was the most complete modern rock icon. He was humble, an incredibly talented writer with so much brilliant output, the voice of a century, and incredibly handsome. Audioslave has been my all-time favorite band since I discovered them in my teenage years in the late 2000s. Of course, I knew Soundgarden before that. I wasn't able to listen to his music for a few years after his death because it triggered sadness. Story 57. Dale Earnhardt is a prominent figure in racing, and even as someone who isn't a race fan, I can't help but be astonished. You see the accidents in these races where cars flip or catch on fire, yet the drivers often walk away unharmed. When he hit that wall, despite the speed, it was expected that he would get out and walk away. Story 58. My grandmother passed away suddenly when I was 11 years old. I had seen her just before she died. She suffered a brain aneurysm that night in her sleep. There was no warning. She was only 50 years old and had seemed like her normal self that day. She was like a second mother to me. My mother tells me that she still remembers my screams when I was informed of the news. I didn't speak to anyone for 2 weeks and wasn't allowed to attend the funeral due to my age. It has been 13 years since then, and I still become emotional around the anniversary of her death. Story 59. I know you're expecting celebrity names, but honestly, my mom came home around 1 p.m. from a weekend with my brother's family. At about 4 p.m., she started to complain of stomach pains. I called for an ambulance at 7 p.m., and she was taken to the hospital at 10 p.m. The next day at 9:17 a.m., she died. Everything happened so quickly that I couldn't process what had occurred. Story 60. In February, my stepnephew died. He had just had a baby and suffered an overdose. Later that month, my cousin, who was around the same age as my stepnephew, also passed away. He took his own life by jumping off a bridge. 2 nights ago, I found out my grandpa may be dying. I wouldn't say I'm shocked, but I am struggling for my mom. She is a daddy's girl and hasn't seen him in nearly 27 years. I'm 30. She is a permanent resident in the United States but does not have citizenship, making it harder for her to get a passport. We don't have extra money and can't afford it, but we are considering a few loans. Even then, I don't know if we could get there before he passes, and flights to Germany are not cheap. The political climate around immigrants is also a concern, with instances of people leaving and not being allowed to return. My dad, who has always dreamed of taking the family to Germany, is worried about it. He is trying to find excuses not to even try. I understand. He has chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which has progressed to severe stages. He wouldn't be able to fly without health concerns. Neither of my parents is in the best health. We purchased my mom a wheelchair because she gets exhausted quickly. My mom's mother was verbally abusive when she was a child, leaving her with scars she has never been able to overcome. That is what weighs on me. Not the deaths, but the effects on the people I love who are still alive. I often feel like I'm not doing enough to take care of them. Story 61. Princess Diana and my Uncle John would have been good company. I am now at the age when a call about the generation above me could come at any time, and I am dreading it. The good thing is that it shows how much you love them, I guess. But it hurts. Story 62. The King of Random, Grant Thompson. One day he was posting videos on YouTube living his best life. The next, he was dead in a paragliding accident. He was the first celebrity I really cared about who died. The king is dead. Long live the king. Story 63. Rush Limbaugh, because I wasn't convinced that he was some malevolent being that had somehow made it to the Earth's surface after gestating in a flaw of evil, and his slow, preventable death by lung cancer wasn't an elaborate deception. Story 64. It may seem unusual because of her age, but I was sure that Betty White would make it to 100. The same goes for Chadwick Boseman. Story 65. Liam Payne was my favorite member of One Direction. At 27 years old, I haven't listened to or followed him in years, but my 14-year-old self was devastated. He was only 31. Story 66. In 2017, a classmate from high school died. She was 18 and 8 months pregnant. A landslide during a stormy night broke one of the walls of her house and crushed her and her boyfriend while they were sleeping. She died, but as soon as the ambulance arrived, they tried to save her baby but were unsuccessful. Her boyfriend was alive but died on the way to the hospital. I didn't have a good relationship with her, but I remember receiving a message at 2 a.m. from a friend saying, "Cynthia died." I was frozen and I have never forgotten it. I still can't believe she has passed. I shared a classroom with her for 3 years and saw her from Monday to Friday. I also remember her grandfather being on the local news, saying how devastated he felt because the house where she died was previously his, and he didn't know how unsafe it was. He was filled with guilt. Story 67. Robin Williams. I heard it on the radio and let out an audible, "What the heck?" Johnny Gaudreau. As much as I disliked that Game 7 overtime winner against the Stars and not signing with the Flyers, his death was just not fair. Story 68. In high school, my classmate suddenly died in a car accident. One day he was here, the next day he was not. I still remember hearing the words from our principal when she and our guidance counselor came to deliver the news, and I saw the aftermath on the news when I got home from school. Story 69. Jacoby Jones, a former Ravens player, passed away at the age of 40. Make sure to get your blood pressure checked, and if it is high, take your medication. Story 70. A friend of mine in college was low-key a celebrity among the students because he was a super outgoing and positive person. He made friends with everyone and did not have conflicts with people. He would help you or point you to someone who could assist, and he was always willing to discuss others' interests. He had a heart attack in class one morning and passed away in his 30s. It broke my heart. That was so young and sudden for anyone to die, and it had to be him of all people. The common spaces changed completely in his absence. Rest in peace, Tyrone. We loved you, man. Story 71. My friend took his own life on my birthday when I was 22. I remember receiving a call from a friend, thinking they were calling to wish me a happy birthday. Story 72. My best friend passed away on February 24th at the age of 56. His heart stopped in his sleep. Losing a friend feels different, probably because we chose each other. Story 73. Heath Ledger and Robin Williams are notable celebrities. I had a friend who lived nearby, attended school with me, and played on the same sports team. My best friend's brother is also mentioned. Additionally, I remember a friend's nephew who tragically lost his life. Story 74. I have lost 3 grandparents so far. They all passed away suddenly during the night. Thankfully, Two of them died in their sleep, and one had a heart attack and passed quickly. Story 75. I don't think it's so much shocking as it is incredibly tragic, but Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa are quite surprising. Story 76. My boyfriend, who was 21, died in a car crash when I was 18. Then, when I was 23, my girlfriend died in a different sudden manner. It wasn't as unexpected, but it was still sudden. Story 77. Robin Williams. I know I never actually knew him, but even to this day, his depression and suicide absolutely blindsided me. He was the epitome of childlike joy and happiness to me. I struggled to come to terms with him hiding such sadness for so long. I had to relearn everything I thought I understood about mental illness. It was truly an eye-opening experience. Story 78. My grandmother's. I live in a different country, and it was apparently not as sudden as it seemed, but nobody told me she was dying until it was too late, and I was informed that she had passed away. I did not have the opportunity to travel back and see her. I loved her dearly. She lived in the same house where I grew up, so she was always around. It was terrible for me. I did not even make it to the funeral. When I visited my family last year, I stayed in her part of the house, and it felt so empty and wrong without her. I still miss you, Oma. God bless you and bring you to heaven. Story 79. My son was fine and doing amazing. I don't know where it went wrong. I saw him for 10 minutes and then I had to lie down. I had a cesarean section and had 3 incisions. The doctor told me he was doing well. The next thing I knew, 3 nurses rushed in, put me in a wheelchair, and I immediately started crying. I sensed something was wrong. I called his dad to come back to the hospital. 30 minutes later, he was gone. Story 80. My uncle, my dad's brother. I was 10 when we got a call, and my parents told me he was in the hospital and it was very serious. They seemed really worried the whole way there, as we lived in a different country. Throughout our journey back home, I kept telling them, "Hey, don't worry, he'll be okay," to calm them down. When we reached the hospital, we went straight to the morgue and saw his body. I lost all control and cried for 3 hours, feeling like my life was over. A year later, I found out that he had taken his own life before he even reached the hospital. I still hate that my parents let me walk in on his body without any warning. He was the one adult best friend I had in my family. He'd always take me out for pizza after my parents told me I couldn't have any more junk food. He'd also take me boating. This affects me to this day. If someone I'm close to tells me they're having suicidal thoughts and I don't hear from them every 3 hours, I start crying because what if it happened again? It's been 13 years, and I still think of him every day. I don't think I'll ever get over it. He never got to see me grow up, and I never got to meet the person he could have become. Story 81. My uncle lived with us and was one of those people who had been in bad accidents but walked away with minimal injuries, someone I believed would be around forever. I came home from school in 2009 and found him dead in his room. He was 40 at the time. Unfortunately, at some point he had been sick and inhaled vomit, and by the time I got back from school it was too late. Story 82. My brother and I had an argument in December 2023. He passed away on January 27th due to suicide. I didn't see it coming, not even remotely. When reality arrives, it doesn't care if you are ready or not. Story 83. Don Cornelius from Soul Train. When I heard about him taking his own life, I cried for days. Soul Train is my favorite show ever, besides Beavis and Butthead or Ren and Stimpy, so it felt like losing someone I cared for and knew, even if that was a stretch. Story 84. My dad had gotten out of the hospital after his gallbladder burst. After a couple of weeks and much improvement, he was released from the hospital. He even came to my workplace to visit and seemed like he was back to normal. One morning, I got up to get ready for work and checked my phone as I usually do. I saw a text from my stepmom asking me to call her when I had the chance. My dad didn't make it through the night. I was devastated and called into work that day and the next 3 days. I didn't leave my bed or eat or drink anything. He passed away on May 6th of last year, and I am still trying to come to grips with the fact that he is gone. My circle of people I trust is very small, and losing my dad was losing one of the most solid links in my chain. I apologize for sending a long message. Everyone. Story 85. A friend of mine died about 10 years ago. She was in her 30s. She just laid down for a nap and didn't wake up. A mutual friend called to inform me. I was trying on shoes and suddenly started sobbing. I took the shoes to the register to check out, still sobbing, and didn't realize for a few days that I had bought the wrong pair. I was on autopilot. I left the store and walked to the subway station, feeling dizzy and kept falling over. Someone told me to sober up. I still think of that day every time I pass that store. Story 86. I don't know if it counts as unexpected, but Mac Miller often talked about using drugs. I loved his music and saw great potential in his career, but then he was gone. Story 87. A manager I worked with some years ago was middle-aged. He ate healthy, was active, and was generally involved in maintaining his well-being. One day, he didn't show up for work. 2 weeks passed, and the general manager, who lived next door to him, stated she hadn't seen him and that his mail had piled up. She didn't see him tending to his garden, jogging, or leaving his home, and he hadn't shown up to work. While I understand he could be annoying, he had never skipped a day of work, and here she was mentioning these things and speaking negatively about him. His sister showed up, asking if we had seen him, and then proceeded to call the police for a welfare check, where they found that he had died of a heart attack. Story 88. On a personal note, my friend Shane suffered a brain aneurysm rupture at the age of 24. I had never lost a friend before, and it was devastating. As for celebrities, I would mention Joe Strummer, Philip Seymour Hoffman, and Chris Cornell. Story 89. My uncle. I was at work the day it happened, and the entire day was going perfectly fine. I received a call from an older cousin I hadn't talked to in almost 9 years, and she broke the news to me. Your uncle was just in a car accident this morning. The emergency medical services believe he must have fallen asleep at the wheel and crashed into a ditch. But they don't know for sure. He didn't make it. Do you want to be the one to tell your mom, or do you want me to do it? What happened was that he was complaining to a few coworkers that morning about feeling sick. They were questioned because they were among the last 3 people to see him alive. Eventually, he decided to go home early for the day and crashed the car into a ditch on the side of a farmer's field. We have no idea if he was dead on impact or if he was alive for a little while. The farmer who witnessed the crash headed toward his vehicle right away and called for help, but my uncle was dead by the time he got to him. To add insult to injury, once my mom went back to work after her bereavement period, her workplace made her train her deceased brother's replacement and wouldn't let her say no to it since they worked at the same car factory. Story 90. Right when I started working, there was an area manager who was really popular and one of the nicest guys you could meet. He died of a heart attack after a game of squash in which he excelled. Story 91. Tom Petty. I was going to see him in July before he died. I said I would catch him the next time he came through, but then he passed away. I have had a few grandparents die, but none of them were sudden or unexpected. Story 92. The death of Vivian was very shocking. I watched her in other Queen's TikToks about a week before her body was found, and she seemed so happy and healthy. Story 93. There is a connection between my dad and my husband. Dad had been in the hospital and was really starting to suffer. My husband's death, however, was due to suicide. That was a difficult call to receive at work. Story 94. I was around 10 when Jim Henson passed away, and he is the only famous person whose death moved me to tears. I thought that because he was the voice of Kermit, Kermit's character died with him. I really loved the Muppets growing up. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.